Hello everyone and welcome to our new Star Trek video. Today, on the suggestion of friend of the channel Thomas Potts, we'll be talking about all the different ways that you can time travel in Star Trek. Now there's a lot of examples of this, so we may not get them all in this video, but we're going to see how far we can get. Also, just a note before we begin, there are some episodes with temporal shenanigans, like different time levels, or episodes where time travel is kind of peripheral to the plot. I'm going to be focusing on those episodes where the time travel itself is a key part of the story. The first example of time travel seen in Star Trek is in the episode The Naked Time, where Scotty, in order to restart the engines, uses a controlled matter-antimatter implosion so that they can escape from a collapsing planet. When this procedure is done, the shipboard clock is seen to move backwards, and by the time they're done, they've traveled back in time 3 days. Spock mentions that this process could be repeated, although it hasn't been to this point. On the other hand, the slingshot effect has been seen numerous times in Star Trek. It was first discovered by accident in Tomorrow is Yesterday, when the Enterprise was almost pulled into a black star. Using warp to escape sent them back in time to 1960s Earth. They recreated the effect by slingshotting around the sun. Then they used this principle on purpose in the episode Assignment Earth to once again return to the 1960s to study Earth's history. And finally, in Star Trek IV, when the crew needed to rescue some humpback whales, they slingshotted around the sun in their bird of prey to the 1980s. In the episode City on the Edge of Forever, the crew of the Enterprise discovers the Guardian of Forever when Dr. McCoy jumps through, and then Kirk and Spock have to follow him to fix whatever damage he did to the timeline. The Guardian is seen again in the animated series episode Yesteryear, when Spock has to go back to save his younger self. And the Guardian is never seen again in the history of Star Trek, and it certainly never took on the form of a human being. In the episode All Our Yesterdays, a planet's citizens know that their star is soon going supernova, so in order to escape this, they use their device called the Atavachron to travel back to different periods of their planet's history. From here, we'll move on to the Next Generation era, where the Enterprise ran into all kinds of anomalies, including various temporal vortices. For example, there was one in the episode Time Squared. In that particular episode, Captain Picard leaves the Enterprise, which is then destroyed, and Captain Picard is sent several hours back in time, where he meets the past version of the Enterprise, at least from his perspective. As the original time is gotten closer, then this Captain Picard disappears, and the quote-unquote past Enterprise managed to escape the Vortex. Another unexplained temporal phenomenon occurs in the episode Yesterday's Enterprise, where the Enterprise C emerges from 22 years in the past and changes the history of the Alpha Quadrant, whereas the Federation and the Klingon Empire have been at war for 20 years. However, when the Enterprise C returns to her time, then history is reset to what we know. In the episode A Matter of Time, the Enterprise encounters time traveler Berlinghoff Rasmussen, who claims he is from the 26th century and is stuttering his past. While his time pod is from the 26th century, he is actually from the 22nd, and he actually stole this time pod and traveled to what is the future for him to try to steal some things and bring them back to his own time and pretend to invent them. Another very strange temporal effect that was encountered by the crew of the Enterprise D was the temporal causality loop in Cause and Effect, which caused them to repeat the same events over and over again, until finally discovering a way to break the loop. while for the Enterprise D, this affected the loss of a few weeks. The starship Bozeman was caught in a similar phenomenon for 90 years. In the episode Time's Arrow, Data's severed head is found in San Francisco, having apparently been there for centuries. And over the course of the two-part episode, it turns out there is an alien race called the Davidians who are using a time portal to travel back to 19th century San Francisco, and the crew has to follow them to foil their dastardly plans. And a description of time travel wouldn't be complete without mentioning the tricks of Q. For example, in Tapestry, when Captain Picard has been attacked and he's in danger of dying due to the failure of his artificial heart, he has what appears to be an interaction with Q, where Q takes him back in time to his youth and gives him a chance to avert the accident that led to his artificial heart in the first place. Although it's left unclear, at least to me, as to whether or not this really happened, or this is just a vision that Picard had, or hallucination, if you will, while he was on the operating table. Furthermore, in the final episode of TNG All Good Things, due to the help of Q, Picard seems to be moving back and forth between 3 different time periods. Moving on to the TNG movies, the strange phenomenon known as the Nexus can effectively be considered a type of time travel, because if you get sucked into the Nexus in one time period, you can apparently leave it at any other time period. So this is how Captain Kirk, for example, is lost in the Nexus in the 2290s, but then emerges in the 2370s. Yeah, I know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then the Borg have their own form of time travel, which is some kind of temporal vortex that they use in First Contact to travel back in time and assimilate Earth. Fortunately, the Enterprise E is caught in the same temporal vortex and follows them back to stop their evil plans. This brings us up to Deep Space Nine. The first notable example of time travel in this show was in the episode Past Tense, where a combination of Chronitons from the Defiance cloaking device and the transporter accidentally sends Sisko, Bashir, and Dax back in time to the 21st century San Francisco, where they get involved in Sanctuary District. Then O'Brien and Kira manage to figure out a way to transport back in time intentionally and rescue them. In the episode Visionary, a combination of radiation poisoning and an artificial singularity transports Chief O'Brien back and forth a couple hours at a time, where he'll move briefly into the future for a moment and then come back to the time we started from. It was eventually learned that the artificial singularity triggering this time travel was a cloaked Romulan warbird. In the episode The Visitor, which, by the way, might be my favorite episode of Deep Space Nine, the wormhole is undergoing a subspace inversion, and an accident in engineering results in Captain Sisko being trapped in subspace, but where he periodically reappears to his son Jake. So effectively, Captain Sisko is time traveling several years at a time for when he briefly appears to his son without having aged, or finally at the end of the episode being snapped back to his starting point. In the hilarious episode Little Green Men, a combination of Kemacite and warp plasma transport Quark's ship along with Rom and Nog, and secretly Odo in tow, back to the 20th century Earth, where they become the Roswell aliens. However, they are able to recreate their accident by flying into an atomic explosion, and they are able to return to their own century. The Prophets, not completely understanding linear time, have been involved with a number of time travel incidents as well. For example, in the episode A Session, they take a Bajoran poet who lived centuries ago and bring him into the 24th century, where he claims the role of emissary. At first, Captain Sisko is happy to pass on this responsibility, but after they have some disagreements, they consult the prophets, where they reveal they brought him forward in time for the captain's benefit, and then now they send him back to his original time. And in addition to direct intervention by the prophets, there are also a couple of occasions of time travel involving the Orb of Time. One of them was in Trials and Tribulations, where the crew of the Defiant travels back to the episode Trouble with Tribbles and has to stop Arne Darvin from sabotaging the events of that episode. Also in the episode Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night, Major Kira travels back in time to evaluate Gul Dukat's claims about his relationship with her mother. There are also a couple of examples of planets being surrounded by some kind of barrier that results in time travel effects. In Children of Time, the Defiant discovers on a planet in the Gamma Quadrant a colony of their own descendants. Apparently an accident sent the Defiant centuries back in time, where they crash landed and had to start their own settlement there. They originally planned to recreate the experiment, but thanks to the manipulations of the older version of Odo, they managed to escape. Furthermore, in the episode The Sound of Her Voice, the Defiant makes contact with a Starfleet captain who has apparently crash landed on a planet. But as they go to rescue her, they find that she has died years ago, and that their communications were actually moved back and forth through time by a number of years through this strange barrier that was surrounding the planet she had crashed on. And for the last example of note in Deep Space Nine, we have the episode Time's Orphan, when the O'Brien family is on a picnic and Molly stumbles across some kind of ancient time portal and falls through it to a time in the past when the planet was uninhabited. And when she is rescued, she's actually been stuck there for 10 years and has become essentially feral. After it became obvious that she would not be able to adapt to life in the 24th century after her experiences, the O'Briens sent her back through the portal, but thankfully for them, she now encounters her younger self who first went through. She gets to go back through the portal to her family, and everybody lived happily ever after. Now that we've finished Deep Space Nine, I think that's a good point to take a break before we move on to Voyager and Enterprise, which are both going to have plenty more examples. So I thank you for joining me for this examination of time travel. Please stay tuned for the next part. I hope you have a blessed day.